All this week on The Perspective with Mike Sherbino and Julie Stautland, a Follow Your Heart Valentine's Week featuring that great Godwinks guy, Squire Rushnell, and his incredible wife, Louise Duarte, who travel the world, or Zoom these days, helping couples, singles, and children meet the true heart of God through their art. Oh, and by the way, did you know Squire Rushnell is an honorary Canadian? His dad grew up in Belleville, Ontario, so we're claiming him for the national treasure that he is. Also on the show, a Perspective regular guest co-host, Mitch Hunter, who Mike says is Niagara's most eligible bachelor. He's here, and Mike's giving out Mitch's number. Ryan and Jennifer Walter are back to give us the nitty-gritty on what long-married couples really want from each other. The former NHL great and his wife help couples and leaders around the world. Plus, Vaughan King, we call her Queen, the first ever Miss Wheelchair Canada author and speaker, is here, this time with her husband Vaughan, who she says she had to drag to the show kicking and screaming. And the doctor is in the house. Grant Mullen and his wife Kathy are here to talk about ways we can shake that nasty, rude, negative inner critic of ours. So move over, Jimmy Fallon. Mike's dream job of hosting late night is coming true. Uh-oh, Julie, you may need your fencing sword.
Hey, we're glad you're with us today on The Perspective. We got lots going on, and I'm glad that Julie's with us again, but also Mitch, thanks for showing up.
Mike, it's good to be back again. I'm getting comfortable here. This is kind of fun.
Well, and we're pumping you up as the most eligible bachelor. Like you owe me big money for this.
Yeah, all right.
What are your thoughts? We're going to talk about conflict today, amongst other things. You ever dealt with conflict, Mitch?
Yeah, I've dealt with conflict. When I was younger in high school, I was in a couple relationships, but I'm curious to see, okay, as you grow up, and as especially in the context of Valentine's Day, romantic relationships, as you grow up, as you get more mature, how do you work through conflict as an adult?
Well, you know what, Mitch? The wise thing is to do what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to defer that to Julie. Julie, how do you work through conflict?
Wow. I thought you were going to say, I'm just going to sit here and be quiet, but wow, I'm speechless.
Yeah, I know you're speechless, and that's what's so funny about all of this. So you know what? I'm going to be teaching about conflict. I want you to take notes, real good notes. And we got an amazing couple. Vaughan and Vaughan King are coming on the program, and they're going to walk us through how to deal with conflict. So get out your pens. It's going to be a great time this morning. Well, I'm delighted today that Vaughan and Vaughan King can be with us. And Vaughan, we've chatted many times. You've been on the program on my radio show. But Vaughan, welcome especially to you, guy. I'm just so glad to meet you finally, even though by Zoom.
Yeah, that's right. No problem.
And all the way from cold Edmonton, where the mosquitoes are almost as big as I encountered when I lived in Winnipeg. So we're glad you're with us. You guys have been through a lot. We're talking about relationships this week. And there's a line in the vows, in sickness and in health. Vaughan, talk to me about what that means to you when you hear that part of the wedding vow.
Honestly, Mike, first of all, I want to say, and it's not cliche, but truly, if it wasn't for Vaughan honoring his vows, we wouldn't have this happy ending today from someone who's broken that vow and been on the receiving end of unconditional love. In unimaginable ways. It has taught me what true love was, and it freed me to truly love myself and receive God's love. And as a result, it gives me the strength to say that, my grace is sufficient for you, and my power is literally made perfect in our weakness. And that is what that's what I think about when I think about honoring our vows, is God's strength in us.
Wow, thanks for sharing that. Vaughan, let me ask you a question, because you guys were engaged, if I have the story correct, and then Vaughan had this life-altering sickness. What went through your mind in those days? Was there ever a doubt that you should get married, or that you were going to maybe just call it off? Did you ever struggle with that?
Definitely, I felt like there was just kind of like a whirlwind of emotions, and I didn't really know what was going on, and like just struggling to figure out where you were and stuff. But through it all, I know that Vaughan's attitude didn't change, and our hope and faith didn't change. So it's kind of kept me grounded, I guess. Yeah.
You've had to learn to persevere through a lot of different things. Let me start back with you first, Vaughan, before I go to Vaughan. What advice would you give to couples on persevering even in the hardest of days?
there was a quote from my father that I wouldn't mind sharing. He basically said that life doesn't get any easier. It's never going to be void of pain, discouragement, or periods of suffering, but just remember that the tools of your Lord are there to transform you. They are there as tools of your Lord to transform you. So you got to lean into them to discover new aspects of Jesus. Any kind of crisis is a unwelcome opportunity for growth. Yeah.
I mean, that's very powerful what you said. I picked up especially on that phrase, you got to lean in to those promises. It's almost like it's a conscious choice that you're making. Vaughan, how have you had to lean in to say, I'm going to keep persevering? I know just recently you went through another bout physically with sickness, and that can be devastating. How have you learned to lean in?
Literally, it's about who I'm leaning into, really. And as long as I'm clinging to God for everything that I need, and having open communication with Vaughan through everything, because, you know, when we say we go through struggles and there's going to be unwelcome opportunities, they're unwelcome, but being able to say, this sucks and this is not good. Like it's not about denying your very real emotion for the very real struggles of life, but it's about allowing God to come in to those very real struggles of life.
Well, thanks. You know, I'm processing that and pondering it for myself. So let's just take a slightly different turn, because the camera doesn't lie, and obviously I'm at least 1 or 2 years older than you guys. But as we age and change, it seems that our roles as husband and wife can change a little bit. I want you to talk to me about how you guys have had to adapt in your roles, and even maybe take us back to the engagement time and then saying, okay, Vaughan, what did you suddenly realize you're going to have to do differently, and how is that changing even now as your wife is becoming a very public spokesperson for what she's been through? Vaughan, start us off.
Well, just the nature of our relationship is like, my situation is that like I have to like deal with more of the physical side of the relationship. So like I'll do the chores, like more like the, you know, making the beds and all that kind of stuff, you know, but overall, she can do the speaking part, and that's great for me. So
I think there's a lot of wives that are wishing that you would call their husbands and teach them how to make the bed. After 40 years, my wife still says I can't do it properly. So like,
yeah.
What else has had to change for you? What's current for you? Where have you had to adapt?
Communication, I guess, is a huge thing for us. Like I've had to grow in just being able to like discuss things that pop up, you know, like they always say, don't be angry, go to bed angry kind of thing. So for that kind of thing, I just managed to just bring things up if they come up, just talk about it, and it really works out well. She's open to most communication. So
yeah, we've had to learn to like even train each other how to communicate with each other, you know, like you know, if there's something that you want to talk about, I think that it's having those tough conversations, but covering it with grace and respect, and know that, you know, we might not always want to hear what the other person has to say, but, you know, we love each other, and that's, you know, we've had to work hard for that. And so we fight hard for that now even. And so we've adapted, but I think no matter how we change, and I don't want to sound cliche, but I'm going to keep coming back to the man who doesn't change. And when we focus on ourselves, through communion with God who doesn't change, then we will adapt and change together. And that's the beauty of relationships, right?
I'm so glad you brought us back to the foundation. As we come back to the cornerstone of our life, we can adapt and we can change because He's the one who remains changeless. And that's a great thing to hold on to. In just a moment, Julie's going to be with us, and she's got a few more questions to ask as we journey through this whole thing of communicating and relationship, and then as I'm going to be teaching on processing conflict. Stay with us. You're watching The Perspective.
A life-altering disability, infidelity, and trapped in a prison of fear. Those were only a few of my giants. What are yours? People see a happy marriage, a crown, a title as Miss Wheelchair Canada, but not understand the giants I've battled. I know what it is to be consumed with fear and struggling to find hope. How easy do you think it was for me to walk through infidelity with my husband? Once I started fighting with God's strength, the battles that nearly destroyed me actually gave me this contagious courage that has unlocked a new level of joy and freedom I didn't know existed. Did you know that every giant you face is an opportunity for an even bigger victory? What giants are you facing right now? Today, I challenge you to look at the giants in your path through God's strength and power, not your own.
Vaughan, it's so great to have you with us today, and especially to have Vaughan. And I have to say right off the top that I personally haven't experienced anywhere near the depth of physical trials that you have gone through. And yet in our long marriage together, my husband and I have had to deal with numerous things that I've had as far as health issues, even up to this day. And I know what it's like to have this health thing right in the middle of your marriage constantly. And I wanted to ask right off the bat, Vaughan, what was your initial reaction when you faced the news of Vaughan's illness?
Well, I know it was just a bit of, like I said before, a whirlwind of trying to figure out what was happening. Lots of prayers were going up trying to stop the paralysis. It was just kept on changing her body. But through those initial days and then even weeks following that, my faith kept me believing in a positive outcome.
Was there any moment where you felt like, I want to run from all of this?
So someone even asked me the same question. They said to me, you know what, it's okay for you to walk away. Like you just got engaged, things have changed, so that's not what you signed up for. But I don't like giving up easily. And besides, Vaughan hadn't really changed. So I just couldn't accept that as an option at the time. So it was maybe new love, I'm not sure, but
love is blind.
Kept us together. So yeah.
Well, Vaughan, I also would like to ask you, what was the hardest thing that you had to face within yourself with this new health challenge before you and Vaughan?
I guess the probably one of the hardest things was to let go of any preconceived ideas of what normal life would be. Like I had to focus on things that I could control and let go of things that I couldn't. So,
how about you, Vaughan?
Oh, well, Julie, that actually was the biggest challenge for me, was accepting the loss of the me I was. And I didn't want to change to adapt as a person with a disability. I felt that because I couldn't do things the way I did before, that made me less of a person, and it kept me stuck. And so we can talk about all these physical limitations, but at the end of the day, the biggest limitation was me and my view of myself. So that was right off the hop.
Wow, that's really good. Yesterday, we talked about the 5 love languages, Gary Chapman, if you've heard about them, and how powerful it is in discerning how to love our spouse properly, because we seem to give and receive love differently. When you have a health issue in the middle of that, I was wondering, did you find that an added challenge of how do I show my spouse, how do I give them the love they need and be able to receive it?
Yeah, actually, this is a really good point that you made, because I remember when we were first married, and I'm now a person with a disability, and we'd be in a room. Do I allow him to get a drink for me because that's just what a girl likes to be treated like? Do I let him get the door for me because I like to be treated like a lady, or do I show my independence? And even through that, we struggled. And I actually took the route that I'm going to try to show my independence because I know he likes seeing me strong. And, I was giving up I just want to be treated like a lady. So it's nice to get things done for you, but not at the risk of now being like a dependent,
How about you, Vaughan?
Yeah.
Yeah. He was really good. There were times where he would even bring me into a restaurant because I didn't want to have my chair seen, and we would rather get the comments of like, oh, you should be
go to a movie theater and I just carry her up the stairs or something like that.
Yeah, we've adapted and changed to it, but I will tell you that early on it was a struggle because there was no manual. We worked through this together, and I think because we weren't able to communicate properly or understand how to work through all that, like those are the good scenarios. But until we were able to truly, like I said, my biggest struggle was myself. So it didn't even matter if he really loved me and said, like, listen, we're going to get through this together. I think the biggest thing was understanding who we were separately and understood ourselves so that we could relate to each other and figure this out, because we didn't know how to figure it out. We stumbled forward, and by the grace of God, we do have our happy ending today.
And it's interesting too. I know in my own relationship that because I didn't have a wheelchair that you could see, it was like, okay, there's something wrong with me, but you can't really tell. And even, you know, with your spouse, you're living life and you're doing stuff and trying to remind yourself like, oh, she's got something that she's dealing with. And I know that with my husband, he becomes a bit of a bear that wants to be just left alone while he recovers from something. Whereas I like to have someone help me and encourage me and tend to me. And so then I want to be that kind of person back. And so if I try to tend to him, I can irritate him. You know, and I was wondering, how did you work that out with the dance between yourselves of how to meet each other's needs that way?
I think at the beginning, like I was always like pressuring her to be strong, you know, and like say, like, don't worry, you know, like, cause like my positive spin on things, my positive attitude, I'm like, you know what, we can get through this and we can push through it. And like, maybe I was avoiding the fact that we do need to like, acknowledge the losses and stuff like that we've had to deal with, and so there's a balance there, you know, like you can't just forge ahead, but you also have to like sit back and accept.
I think that's great. There is that balance and extending grace to one another. Right now, I want to bring back Mitch and Mike. I know they want to share too.
Right on. Well, Vaughan and Vaughan, I appreciate what you guys are saying, and me and Mike have been listening in the whole time. Now, I've got to ask you a question, to Vaughan or to Vaughan. I'm a young guy. What do you say to folks who are looking forward to a young couple? They're thinking about a happily ever after, and you both shared, you said, life has thrown you a curveball, and now the situation has changed. What advice do you have for young people?
Well, I would like to say that happily ever after is possible. Just as sure as you will also face troubles and trials, as Vaughan quoted his father earlier, I don't think you will be spared. You can pray to ask God to spare you from troubles, but I would say pray for God to be with you in your troubles, but also don't be afraid to have tough conversations with each other. Because I would say to couples who are, you know, wanting God to spare them from troubles, I mean, that's great because we would like a happy life without any difficulties, right? But I would say, don't be afraid to reach out to others to tell them how you're struggling, and advise them to have those tough conversations in daily communication, and, you know, talk about finances, talk about sex, talk about internet use, but be in community, but be open with each other.
Hey, well, listen, folks, I just want to thank you for being authentic. You always are when you're on the program. You've spoken into our life. We've given Mitch some great counsel, and we're going to continue on in the whole thing of conflict today, how to resolve it with my teaching. So stay with us and watch right now.
Do you ever feel that life gives you more than you can handle? Maybe you think, if God truly loved me, He wouldn't allow me to suffer like this. You know I'm not the only one who's yelled at God and said, how could you let this happen? Or, don't you care about me? You know, it was in my pain and periods of questioning that I learned to trust God more than ever before. Only then was I able to believe God when He said, Vaughan, I'm able to do way more than you can ever hope or imagine if you just trust me. I've learned that if you're never tested, you'll never know what you're capable of. And if you don't learn to trust God, you'll never know what He's capable of. Are you willing to trust God with your pain and overwhelming circumstances today? I invite you to join me in an adventure to discover God's intended more for your life.
In most relationships, there's one thing we tend to run from. We don't want it. We want to avoid it. We do whatever we can to not deal with it. You've guessed it. It's conflict. And oftentimes what happens is conflict begins to brew, so does our anger. It's almost like they're interconnected. You know, one of the reasons we get angry in a relationship is when we don't get what we want. And sometimes we've come with preconceived ideas that our spouse understands exactly what we want. I remember going through that in my own relationship. And my wife finally looked at me and she said, how do I know what you want if you don't tell me? And I know that seems like a kind of a dumb comment, but for me, the light came on when I realized that I needed to communicate what I wanted. And sometimes the conflict just wants to brew within us. The other reason we have conflict is when we don't get what our partner was hoping that we would have, and when they don't cooperate with our plans. Do you ever think about that? You know what it's like at work, you kind of got to give and take, and somebody's calling the shots. But when you come home, whether you're the guy or the woman, you're hoping that your partner is going to do something, and there is a breakdown of communication. Now, oftentimes, people want to suppress anger. They'll nurse a grudge, and they'll build bitterness. Sometimes people express it, and there can be violent and screaming. I'm always intrigued as I get to know families as a pastor and as a counselor, as I've listened to the language that is in their home. Could that be you today? I want to encourage you to dial it back, to speak words that give life and give hope, because even if you're a screamer, you can tear people apart so much. So a lot of times you just want to pick up and get going and think, well, okay, that's over, and we kind of dust our hands. But other people are just mortally wounded by the words you've said. And then sometimes people repress it. They sulk. They keep it in. But healthy people confess their anger. And when they learn to confess their anger, it helps to bring healing to the conflict. And we provide a way to go ahead. At the end of the talk today, we're making available a PDF on how to handle conflict on some 6 points that you can use to diffuse the tension in your relationship. But one of the common reasons of conflict in a relationship is the fact that you don't have goals for your relationship. Many people just think, oh, you know, we want to live happily ever after. Well, that's not a bad goal, but if you make it as a goal, then you need to plan out how you're going to do it and how it's going to happen. One of the other reasons there is so much conflict in a relationship is when you become insensitive to your spouse's needs. In yesterday's program, we talked about listening, and the PDF that we gave out on listening, and you can still get it today, helps you to be sensitive to what it is your spouse has been saying. And then the other thing, of course, we talked about it yesterday, I want to refer to it again. The reason often there is so much conflict in a relationship is when one of you thinks that you know it all. And sometimes it's the guy. Many times we speak it out quickly because that's part of our defense mechanism. We don't want to admit that, hey, we are wrong, because that involves me changing. It involves me being open to the fact that I have not only done something wrong, but I've hurt my significant other, the one I profess to love, and that I need to do some rebuilding in the relationship to rebuild trust. So here are some steps for solving conflict. Let me just give you a couple brief ones, encourage you again to get the PDF today. Don't use the silent treatment. The person who said silence is golden was wrong. They were lying. Silence is not golden. It's easy to pull back and not talk. And then do you remember way back in the day when they used to have gold bond trading stamps? I vaguely remember my mother collecting them. You get enough stamps, you get a free item at the store. Many times we save emotional trading stamps. Oh, I remember when you said this to me, or you did that, and we can't move past it. And so the conflict begins to grow and grow within us. But when you have a blow up, you can avoid the bomb going off if you prepare the setting for a disagreement. To say to your spouse, hey, honey, things aren't going well. I am really uptight. This is really bothering me. Let's plan to sit down right after supper and let's talk it through. And talk it through when the kids aren't around. I've had conflict in my relationship with Terry. We've had to work through so many things, and there's always issues. But I'm so grateful. She's never ripped a shred off of me in public. Did I deserve it? Absolutely. She's never said things to me in front of the children. It's always been in private so that she can speak truth and hope to my life. That has been an incredible gift. And if I could say this, you need to attack the problem, not each other. Don't say things like, you always do this, because that is just deflating to an individual. Can we ever recover? Can we ever come back? And when you communicate with hope, saying, I want to talk through this as difficult as it is, because I want our relationship to be better, and I am committed to you.
Well, Mike, I appreciate your message, and I was sitting here and I was listening the whole time. I was taking notes just as you recommended. I'm going to go home. I'm going to stick this up on my bulletin board, everything you said. But I've got a question for you. Right in the beginning of your talk, you said there are two things. Well, you said there are multiple things, but two of the things that contribute to conflict. You said a desire to have what you want, and say these are what I want, these are my needs, and you said a desire to have your own plans fulfilled. And so I hear you saying that if we push that on the other person, then that can contribute to conflict. What I'm wondering is, how do I still say, okay, I'm still a human being, I still have needs, I still have wants, I still have plans, so how do we make room for that without contributing to conflict?
Well, Mitch, you're in an ideal situation because you're not married yet, so you need to lay out what's important to you to that particular person whenever she comes along. But if you are married, you need to stop and sit down and say, hey, this is what's important to me, this is what I'm really enjoying. Is there a way that we can work on this together? I'm going to bring Julie into the fray because I'm sure she's had to deal with that, where you had a plan, and then, you know, your amazing husband, Tor, he said, I want to do something different. So how did you figure it out, Julie?
Never happens. Well, I'm a firstborn. Tor is a firstborn. And I think there's also something about birth order there. So you have two very strong, opinionated firstborns. And that means you need to be extra careful about how much you want to push your own way. And it does mean you have to set boundaries and go, okay, let's just, like you said, talk about the issue and not start attacking each other's ideas and saying, look, I don't like that idea, mine's better. You know, really looking at, this is an issue, let's deal with it, let's step back, let's hold back on our own opinions and really see how can we compromise properly with this.
Okay, I'm listening to that. Mitch, I want your feedback as the eligible bachelor today. What do you say?
Yeah, well, so Mike, I'm actually hoping either you or Julie could give me advice, because I'm saying I'm a young guy, I'm growing up, and maybe there's other viewers who are identifying. I'm just speaking from the guy's perspective. We're saying, okay, well, we want to be strong, want to be supportive. The guys say, okay, I'm the spiritual leader of the house, whatever, and that's good. How do we fill that role as guys without just steamrolling our spouses? How do we do that? Do either of you have any advice?
Well, I think maybe in a nutshell, because you've talked on something so important, is to start to think differently. And think differently, realize the person that God brings into your life is a gift. And many times we look at a relationship that it's all about me, but it's not. Marriage is an act where we get to live out the selfless life, where we follow after Jesus, who said he laid down his life for the church, for the people he loved. And in the same way, a husband is called to lay down his life. And as I learned to lay down my life for my wife, I've discovered that she wants to give to me in ways that I couldn't imagine either. So it's really a saying where we not only compete, we don't want to compete, we want to complete each other.